introductions for the commenters?
Yeah. So, yeah, we are. Hi, everyone. I am talking today to two Trotskyists about history and ethics and also education. Um, so we have Sharky, if you want to introduce yourself first.
I am Sharky Jeff, Bolshevik Leninist, Emperor of the French, King of Italy, and that's about all.
Cool. And Hans, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Hans. I'm the best debater you've ever met. Anyway, I'm Hans, and I'm a great debater, and I'm a Trotskyist. So I'm gonna destroy Piper in this debate.
Yeah.
I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'll start by kind of saying this. So I think we should probably start on what me and or myself and Sharky were debating on Twitter that led to this. The Sharky was talking about some comment made by an anarchist on Twitter about education, about abolishing schools, and they said that was, or he said that was stupid. And then I kind of, specifically, the comment by the anarchist was that was that communist republics like the Soviet Union having schools meant that it was an indication that they were in fact capitalist. And Sharky made fun of that, and then I replied saying that essentially that was correct, and pointing out the experimentation with progressive schooling by the Bolsheviks that was ended by Stalin. And so then we got into a debate about that. It went down a semantics rabbit hole eventually, but I mean, I'll just say that. I mean, so fine if you don't want to say abolish schools or whatever, you want to say abolish capitalist schooling and have progressive socialist schools. Fine, I don't really care. But so what would either you say is your main contention with the way that anarchists view schooling or education?
Well,
Okay.
yeah, I'll take it. I think it depends on the anarchist. The person who I quote tweeted
Mm-hmm.
Was Anarchismus,
Yeah.
my loyal countryman and subject, and it was he specifically is somebody I would disagree with on a vast majority of topics.
Sure.
But as for abolish schools specifically, hold on, can you just give me a moment? Technical
That's
issues.
fine. Take your time.
I think one thing about that tweet is that the issue with is not so much that it's against whatever is seen as capitalist schooling. I think it's more that they just take the word school and say, oh, there was school in the Soviet Union, so it was capitalist. That makes no sense. Like, do we agree that we would, whatever society we have, we'll still have places where people go to learn stuff, to learn, I don't know, or how to use the machines we have in whatever society we have. You can call that whatever you want. You can call it not school. You can call it on school. You can call it the free people school. Whatever you want.
I agree.
It will still exist. So I think the idea of just saying, oh, there were places where people could learn, and then that makes it capitalist. That makes no sense. I don't know if you agree with me.
Also,
sure. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Sharky.
The way that the tweet was phrased is kind of the way that a lot of anarchism's tweets are phrased, where it's very broad and seems ridiculous, but the specifics of what he's saying are generally less ridiculous. So you would clarify from the Soviet Union having schools means that they were capitalist to the Soviet Union in its later stages having an education system that is similar to that under capitalism is an indication that's capitalist, which is still something that I would disagree with, but not to the same extent.
Sure, yeah. So what I said, and Hans dropped out, I think. Oh no, he's back. And I'm back to the stream. Okay. So what I said in response, and so like Hans said, I agree that in any society there will be places where people go to learn. If you want to call if you want to call those schools or whatever, I don't really care. But so be that as it may, my response was that in the Soviet Union, and specifically, it wasn't the later stages. It was, you're talking about NEP period to Stalin period, so that's still pretty early. But in any case, during the 1920s, there were experiments with what you might call progressive schooling, reducing teacher authority over students, getting rid of tests and homework, etc. Student-centered education. Now, not really a lot at all was able to be done in terms of these experiments because the regime at this time was under-resourced. But once Stalin comes to power, he basically just implements kind of standardized, regimented schooling. People have to wear uniforms. Student authority is restored. And, maybe most distressingly, you have non-Russian national minorities that are forced to learn Russian, even though they haven't even had a chance to adapt to learning Cyrillic yet. So it kind of causes a culture shock. And what I said about that was the result of the fact that the Soviet Union, by Stalin's time, and along with the terror that Stalin was unleashing, needed to discipline society to achieve success in the world economy, to achieve success in geopolitics, and thus ultimately being capitalist. If you're a Trotskyist, you will say, well, it's not capitalist, it's a degenerated worker state or whatever. But that was what I said in response. So you guys can comment on that in whatever way you feel appropriate.
Well, I agree with most of what you say. I mean, neither of us are massive fans of Stalin.
Not.
Yeah, it'd be kind of weird. But I also think what you identify as capitalism and you identify with Stalin as capitalism is not necessarily capitalism. So I think that there were also fundamental differences, and that's more just to accurately understand the situation. And a good example to use for when it comes to Stalin is how even though so with Stalin, even though in a lot of the surface level ways he was very similar to the former Tsarist Russia in terms of imperialism, Great Russian chauvinism, and in expansion, not necessarily imperialism, chauvinism, and Russification or Russification. But there were also fundamental differences in how the economic aspects of society were run, in the same way that after the French Revolution, even though Napoleon restored the church and the pomp and circumstance of the military and a lot of aspects that existed in uh, French culture, in French society pre-revolution, uh, it was still a fundamentally different and fundamentally changed society. So the USSR uh, was a degenerated worker state in that it had taken a reactionary turn in a lot of ways, but was still fundamentally a different state economically than the capitalist nations of the world.
Sure. I mean, we could get into that debate. I'd be happy to have that debate. I don't know if
Can I
that
just
would
say
be.
something about what you said before?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you identified as like the symptoms of capitalism
Mhm.
is like what the same thing that we will say. This is the sign that the worker state was degenerated. I
Yeah,
think
I
those
assume that. Yeah, I
those
assume that would be.
those yeah those are real things. I think, and it isn't just with schools. I think one big shocking example of that is with the family. I think at the beginning of the October Revolution, women were on their way to emancipation. Like the revolution started with women, and then we we started saying countries say first to break up the family and then just uh, socialize domestic labor. Like
Mhm.
there were public cafeterias, there were public laundries. The way they built housing started changing. But when the bureaucracy got in power, and then they started rolling back those changes, and I think it's for the same reason that you said. It's because they wanted to control the society in a way that could make them succeed, not necessarily succeed economically, but to assert the power of a society. They also had to bring back the family as a stepping stone where we could have the men and the women and the children that
Mhm.
obey them, that
Right.
as as a as a as a miniature set of that society they wanted to build. So I think you're right about that. That
Mhm.
the same thing could have been seen in schools, just like it could be seen in the family, just like it could be seen in any really in any gains that the revolution made. You started seeing them rolled back. So yeah, I think you're right about that. It's just that I think ultimately we disagree on whether or not that made the Soviet Union
Sure.
capitalist. But I think we agree that yeah, those are real things. Yeah.
Yeah, there
Although,
was. I just want to say one thing. There was a movie made in the Soviet Union called Father and Son, and it was about a factory manager who was a bad father because he was too dedicated to his job as a factory manager. And the movie got banned in the Soviet Union, and the movie maker himself got purged, so under Stalin. So but yeah, go ahead.
many cases. I was just going to say that I think that even though this agreement, I'm not going to undermine its importance, which I think a lot of people do. I think it's important from kind of a scientific aspect, I guess, but would prefer if we talked more about the more major disagreements, like when it comes to specifically what is the fundamental problem with education as it is now.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to get to. So, um, do you? So, is I don't know how much in terms of anarchist ideas you guys have engaged with, but in terms of what anarchists say is the problem with education, do you see that there is a larger problem with the anarchist analysis of education in modern societies? Are anarchists not getting to the root of the problem? What's your opinion on that, both of you?
I think it's
Oh,
I think it's hard to say what anarchists think about anything really, because no two anarchists agree on anything. and then they will tell you that no, this is not what I think, and then there's no set beliefs that any anarchists have. So I think it'd be better if you told us what you think is the anyway what you think is the issue, or whatever specifics you'd like to get into, because that would
Yeah,
work better, I think.
yeah. I mean, so I will challenge the kind of hopelessly variated picture of anarchism that you painted. Insofar as any two anarchists don't agree on anything. I mean, the same goes for Marxists, quote unquote. Now, Marxists typically have this debate about, okay, well, you're not actually a Marxist, or you're a revisionist, or whatever. Anarchists don't necessarily do that. They kind of just accept that, okay, we're all anarchists, but we all disagree about stuff. It's not really that much of a difference. The only difference is, from my perspective, that Marxists accuse each other of not being real Marxists. But I guess in terms of, I will agree to some extent that it's more useful to identify the specific ideas of anarchists than just saying, okay, well, this is an anarchist view. I guess my perspective is that I see education as has expanded in the past century, maybe around the world. Education has expanded, and I think the issue with it is number one, it's basically kind of a regimented imposition on the lives of youth, essentially conditioning them for life in the capitalist world system, with the justification that this will provide them some knowledge of the world beyond their parochial local understanding of it, and that in that process has ignored many of those youth who are subject to this education, whether or not the youth themselves actually think they have a use for it. And then at the academic level, the university level, of course, there is the so-called ivory tower, where the division of mental and manual labor in capitalist society means that you have an increasingly specialized university system where only some people have access to the best answers that we have to the biggest questions, the most interesting knowledge about the world, and everybody else doesn't. And I think that's why you get like anti-science movements, like with the current, anti-mask and anti-vaccine and so forth. So that's my perspective. I think education is something in the capitalist world system that is designed to habituate people to the capitalist world system and designed to serve the division between mental and manual labor. That's my perspective on it.
I agree with most of the fundamental things he said. I would have some disagreements, like when he talked about mental versus physical labor. I don't believe it starts at the higher education level. I think that the division of labor is pretty heavily enforced very early on. I suggested when we were talking on Twitter an essay by Mike Rose. Did you read it? I mean,
I didn't get a chance. I apologize.
Getting some really interesting commentary from the comments here. Really
yeah, I think some bot is like showing up.
Yeah, I'm really being taken aback by these advanced arguments going on in the comments.
Yeah. Apparently, someone named Loveface wants us to just go website and jerk off. Anyway, continue what you were saying. Sorry about
that. In America, at least where
I just realized that was probably a porn bot. Why the fuck are there porn bots on YouTube? That makes no sense. Anyway, go
ahead. Specifically for smaller grade levels, it is in dividing classes between the more slow ones and the ones that go faster and cover more territory. And it's not for the purpose of giving people the class they need, but specifically for sorting out whether or not they're able to have a future in mental labor.
Yeah, so I don't think it starts at the university level. What I was saying is that at the university level, with increased specialization of fields and kind of the ivory tower, well, this is what the experts say about stuff, and really only those people have access to the information. That's one of the kind of highest expressions of the mental and manual division of labor. I'm not saying it starts there. It doesn't start there. It's present in all, pretty much all social relations in the capitalist world system.
Some things I would say, though, that you mentioned as negative aspects of education are teacher authority over students. And I think that there are instances where teacher authority over students isn't inherently bad. I'm not sure what exactly you'd mean by that. Like,
well, so one of the concepts that was experimented with in the 1920s in the Soviet Union was the idea of student-centered education. There's also a theorist of education that the anarchist movement was very taken with. His name was Francisco Ferrer. Basically, the idea is that instead of the student-teacher relationship being, okay, I'm going to force you to memorize or internalize this material, and you're going to be subject to a bunch of behavioral codes that I'm going to hand down or that I'm going to enforce on you. Instead of that, students, there's a self-directed process of students seeking out what they want to learn, and the teacher is there to facilitate that.
So, I mean, these are just specific disagreements with experiments. I don't think that I'd like to be, all-powerful minister of education. So, as for individual things like that, I think the term experiment is good. I don't know if it would work or not. I personally tend to find some level of authority over the teacher deciding what the student learns at a specific point, especially for history or language focused courses, to be useful, but maybe education could work without it. It seems like the reason that we focused on semantics on the Twitter debate was that our disagreement is primarily on semantics.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't really care. So if you want to say that the issue isn't school, it is capitalist, regimented, hierarchical schooling, then yes, I agree. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you can call it bleep, blorp, bloop, blop. It doesn't matter what you call it. It just matters what the concept is.
Yeah.
I do think that we need teachers to have some kind of responsibility or authority in schools, because kids just don't know what they should learn, because they just don't know, otherwise they wouldn't be at school. Like, if you send your kid to school and then they are gonna tell the teacher, oh, we would like to learn about multiplication. They don't even know that's a thing that exists. They have to have someone to tell them that this exists and then to teach it to them. So I think that's and I think that's what the maybe this is gonna sound flippant, but anarchists have this fetishism of authority, and then they see authority in everything, and then they see it as an inherently bad thing, or that, oh, you have authority on people. Authority sounds bad. That's a bad thing. No, it isn't a bad thing for teachers to tell kids what they should learn. Now, should teacher be abusing kids or doing anything that's not accepted in any other settings in society to children? No, they shouldn't. But I think you need someone who knows what's to be done, and then maybe they are gonna force the kids to do it. Maybe they will convince them that you need to know multiplication to be able to do whatever in society. But ultimately
It
what.
would be very difficult to convince me to learn calculus voluntarily, though.
Yeah,
Well, I don't. I
probably.
mean, so I don't. I don't. I don't know. I was bad at math, so I never paid attention. I mean, I was I was forced to learn it in school, but I didn't actually learn it because I didn't pay attention, and I didn't care. And actually, I find very little use for it now that we have like electronics and calculators and so forth. But someone who wants to be a mathematician would have a very different path from me, and they would do so voluntarily. I mean, I don't really know. So, but putting that aside, in terms of children, so yes, infants can't direct their own activities. But the point is, as the wider community provides for the development of that child, the more that they grow and become more conscious of the world around them, the more that they are then allowed to self-determine. So the more activities that they are allowed for themselves to direct themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I I suppose there are, and I don't think that there's enough disagreements where this would actually be a two-sided thing at all. I feel like it would really just be just two people talking about what they don't like about education.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I mean, we can address the authority thing because that gets into a more fundamental ideological issue. So, in terms of the authority thing, what anarchists mean historically when they railed against authority or hierarchy was not really any different than what Marx meant when he was talking about alienation. So, hierarchy or authority for anarchists is when human beings do not control the relationships to themselves and to nature that they themselves create.
But I don't think that's. Anyway, maybe that's how the term is defined now. But I don't think that in the so-called debate that there's about authority, and then there's this Engels text on authority that everyone starts spamming. I think they do define authority as giving someone else some kind of power over you, and then some kind of recognition to use that power. I think Engels uses the give some examples in that text about like, oh, if you're in a ship and then the ship is sinking, or there's a tornado, you need to have someone who's gonna take decisions, and then everyone that's gonna have to fall back behind that person. Now you could say that, if that person was elected and then the the whole community agrees with the leadership, it's not authority. What I do think it is authority. That's what leadership is, whether it is chosen, whether they call it chosen by God, or you choose it through democratic means. I think it's still ultimately the same thing, that there's someone who's deciding for the rest in a certain situation. So I
Yeah.
do.
So the problem. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that I don't think that's something that's not gonna disappear. That's gonna, as long as we have an organized society, we will still need people to take responsibility and make decisions, and then maybe we will just boot them if they make the wrong decision, or then we'll have to have a discussion with them, or whatever. But we'll still have people we'll still need people to like decide what to do at a certain point, because not everything is just decided by itself.
Mm-hmm.
A really good. I love citing non-Marxist sources in debates to defend Marxism. The one of the best things that I've read specifically on this topic. Jean-Paul Marat, the
You vaguely,
journalist.
yeah.
He's the big in school. It's like mandatory education, but they call him the voice of the revolution, French Revolution. But he was one of the more radical voices, got martyred, etc., etc. But when he was calling for, during desperate, uh, a very desperate period during the uh, French Revolutionary Wars, when they were losing on all fronts, due to the extremely poor management of the directory, he sent a letter to the Jacobins saying that there should be a chief who should direct direct the actions in the interests of the masses, and take firm, decisive control over the decisions that are made. And when he was actually in a very similar way, which I think is Marxist versus anarchist debate now, he was then criticized as if it was a return to the monarchs and masters of the French Revolution. And then he responded by saying that it's a very fundamentally different thing when the leader is tied to a specific class and that class's interests and can be is brought to their position because of the interests of the class and can lose their position if they no longer fulfill that role. So I think that the authority that leaders of in situations where authority is necessary, and I would call it authority, that
Right. Are you guys speaking over each other?
What'd you say?
Wait, can you start over, Piper? I didn't get the first thing you said. Can you start over?
Wait, what do you mean Sharky was speaking the entire time?
Yeah. This is getting into a really convoluted analogy, but I'm just saying that I thought that this would be more concise. But I'm just saying that
I just had the YouTube playing, so I was confused.
Okay.
There's a fundamental difference between leadership and those who take decisive and immediate action on behalf of a group, and those who rule over a group. And I think that a lot of anarchists, I'm not sure if you're one of them because there's a lot of variety among anarchists, but I think that a lot of anarchists blur the line between the two of them.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that's basically the arguments in or the argument put forward in the piece that you sent out on Twitter that I did a response to. So, yeah, in terms of what Hans said about on authority, the problem with on authority is that Engels is not an authority on what anarchists think. In fact, if you read the essay and compare it to what people like Bakunin or Kropotkin were saying about the same issues, or any anarchist from the 19th century or the 20th century, Engels basically says, well, authority is either when you use force or when you delegate some decision. Now, that was not what anarchists thought of as authority. What anarchists thought of as authority was, again, alienation, relations between human beings and between human beings and nature that human beings created that they did not control. An example being the state. The citizens allow the state to rule, but the state rules the citizens, right? Capitalist production. Workers carry out capitalist production, but they are controlled by it using with the use of the workplace clock and the management bureaucracy, right? So that is what anarchists meant when they said authority.
Can I put a question on that?
Well, hold on, let me finish. So then, what Engels does in his essay is he says, no, authority is what I mean by it. And what I mean by it is delegation and the use of force. Anarchists would make use of delegation and force. Therefore, when anarchists talk about authority, it's just a bunch of nonsense. Now, what that is it's essentially, it's like conceptual imperialism, basically. Well, when you say something, what you mean by it has to be what I mean by it. So it's a very bad argument. I can respond to what Sharky said, or I'll let Hans go first since I responded to what he said.
Yeah, I think Engels do consider that definition you give as like not being able to control the relationships, because it does talk about like the steam machine, whatever, and then that was one of those examples, and I think it does point out correctly what anarchists generally see as authority, because I think you would agree that like a police officer has authority over citizen or the workers. Do you agree with that?
Sure.
Yeah. So that authority is given to the police officer, not because they have a gun, but because we've come to associate the police officer in society as that person who can use their gun against you, maybe without any repercussions. And that the issue with that isn't that they can use their gun, or that people recognize them, is that they are given this the go ahead to use that power over the rest of society by a tiny minority, and not by the rest of society. And I think it's the same thing with like the clock in the factory. We still have people producing stuff under communism. So maybe
We will have
the
people
time
purchasing things under communism.
producing stuff under communism.
So, like, there's going to
we
be
still
the buying and selling of commodities under communism.
no, that's not, I said we still have people producing stuff under communism.
I'm sorry, I might not be understanding what you're saying when you say like the word you're using. Sounds like purchasing to me.
Producing stuff.
Producing. Oh, sorry, that's my bad. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So we still have people producing stuff on the communism, and to do that, to produce in an organized way, we will still have to follow some laws. Like if you need solar power to do something, you still have to make sure that your solar panels are oriented the correct way to grab the sunlight, and then to charge your batteries, whatever. So we'll still have to do those things. We'll still have a clock. If we have a factory, maybe that time the clock will not the time you have to work will not be decided by some boss or some bureaucrat, but it will be decided by the factory itself, and then by society in general, by those who produce. So I don't think the clock is. I don't think seeing the clock is as some kind of authority that is bad is productive, and I think Engels do address that, but I think
I don't think
it still works that you still have to use, you still have to understand the laws of nature and then use them to your own advantage, but you can't make the laws of nature do what they can do. Like you can't make gravity disappear. Maybe you can make it.
Can we use this as an opportunity to go into topic 2?
What'd you say?
Like this specifically, this point right now, can we use this as an opportunity to move on to topic 2?
I mean, I had some other stuff to say. So I don't think Ingalls addresses anything about the workplace clock. He talks about production, but I've read the essay like numerous times. I don't think he ever talks about the clock. But
not specifically, but it does address the same kind of argument, I think.
I don't really know, but putting that aside, so you say like the factory will still determine the level of production or labor that is needed. If that's the case, then it's no different than
I said that society will decide.
Okay, society. Okay, so yeah. I mean, we don't disagree that people will produce things and decide on how to produce them. But again, I mean, the issue is that unless you're talking about like very fringe, like individualist anarchists or post-left anarchists today, anarchists don't argue against that. So it's an issue. Like there are no anarchists besides the two groups that I just mentioned that say, okay, well, in the future society, nobody will produce anything. So it's an issue of knowing what you're arguing against. And that was kind of the problem. That's kind of the problem when Marxists tried to use Engels as an authority on anarchism because he just didn't understand how anarchists were conceiving of authority. And insofar as he did, he kind of just brushed it aside. So when he says, these gentlemen, they changed the name of the things and think they're changing the things themselves, what he's saying there is, no, you have to go with my conception of what authority is, and what you talk about when you say authority is irrelevant. Again, it's conceptual imperialism, and so it's not really. It's basically.
I don't know about conceptual imperialism.
It's basically just creating a straw man. Go ahead.
I guess it is to some extent. It's, I think, taking a specific position, perhaps overgeneralizing it to a larger group. It is definitely not a sufficient response to the anarchist trends at the time. It's like 2 pages long, a good afternoon read, but there are more extensive works on the topic. I'm loving Bobby Spam in the comments.
Yeah, he's funny. He's like a Wikipedia leftist that used to hang out with me and my friends. And one day he said some like really gross anti-Palestinian shit, and he called my Jewish girlfriend at the time a Nazi bitch. So he came in here, like, he's still butt mad about it. So he came in here to insult me, and then I got him to type like 20 paragraphs by just calling him a racist. So. Yeah,
I think his word count is now actually approaching on authority in the comment section.
What'd you say?
So his word count is now approaching the entirety of on authority in the comment
section. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably gonna ban him if he keeps spamming. But anyway, go ahead.
I mean, we joke anarchists can't read, but these are really some essays.
Yeah.
So, for the topic of I'll just let Hans take it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that in that essay, and I don't think it's correct to say that Engels sees himself as an authority on anarchism. I think he was just someone who was.
I think Marxists treat him that way.
Well, I don't treat him that way. I don't see Engels.
I mean, you cited him when you were talking about what anarchists think.
No, I was talking about authority, and he talked about authority, so I cited him.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't presume that Engels is like the authority on anarchist.
That's fine.
I don't think we're debating anarchists here. More so like what anarchists believe and what we believe about those things. So
sure.
I put a small snippet of the text in the chat, and he's talking about like a cotton spinning mill, and what he's saying is essentially is that all the workers will have to, if they want to use the power of the steam, they will have to bow to its own laws. Like they will have to know those laws and then use them. They can't make them do their opposite. And then I think there's a couple of sentences about the clock here in here, because you have a certain schedule to follow to use the certain laws of nature, and then being forced, quote unquote, to use those laws is authority. But that is something. But and I think that's the general point he's trying to make toward the essay, is that authority does exist, but it isn't something inherently bad. It is something that depends on the context and then what you do with it. And I think that's something that both sides, Stalinists and anarchists, both don't get. They just shout over each other. But I think that's the main point of the essay. Like authority does exist. Like delegating power to other people, using laws of nature that we can change. Those things are what we would call authority. And then, but doesn't make them bad things. You just have to know how to use them.
Yeah. So this is. So yeah, I mean, I remember all that from the essay. He's saying, okay, well, if there are certain requirements for producing X that people have undertaken to produce X because they want to produce X or need to produce X or whatever, then that is a form of authority, right? And so he actually tries to address objections from anarchists. So in that same section, he says, well, the anarchists might say that the organization of this production be done by the producers themselves by free agreement. And they may delegate tasks by free agreement. But that doesn't matter because what I'm these requirements of production are still what I call authority. So therefore, their conception of authority is still nonsense. Again, it's just my definition or my conception of authority is the correct one, and your conception of authority or what you mean when you say that word. What I mean when I say that word is more important than what you mean when you say that word. And so it's creating a straw man.
Can we just get a definition for authority from you, and then we can talk about that? I think.
Yeah. So I actually talked about that before. So when anarchists talk about authority or hierarchy, again, they're talking about what Marx was talking about when he was talking about alienation, relationships between human beings and relationships between human beings and nature, which the human beings create, but they do not control.
By the way, update for people watching afterwards. Bobby just also owned my boyfriend in the chat, so he's really going. No one's safe from his wrath.
Yeah.
As much as I like this topic, I am really running low on time, so I would like it if we could get to talking about laws of nature and morality and ethics and all that.
Go ahead, say what you want to say about that.
I would just say one thing before we wrap up with that, is that you said that authority is like when humans create relationships with nature or each other that they don't control. Mm-hmm. They'll see that as like as we were talking before about a factory, where we all have to decide together to if we need 50 people to work in the factory at a set time to produce something, we will have to have those people and not have 10 come in like at 3 in the morning and then 10 others at noon and 10 others whenever they want. We will still have to make a decision and then all stick by it. Do you see that as authority because you don't individually control that relationship?
Well, I don't know what you mean by individually control. When I talk about human control over human relationships, I mean that when humans create relationships, they set the parameters of those relationships. Now, there are relationships that human beings have which they don't create, and therefore they can't control. So human beings don't create tornadoes, so they can't control the fact that when a tornado rips through their neighborhood, their house is going to get uplifted. But human beings do create the process of capitalist production in which accumulation takes precedence over their needs as producers. And so they can transform that relationship to make their needs as producers primary in the production process.
I swear.
We agree with that. I don't think there's any disagreement here.
Cool. What are you going to say, Sharky?
I swear this will be the last comment about Bobby, but really, like, what he just posted is actual copy pasta material. It's so good.
Yeah.
Being on the spectrum, being the only anarchist in a family of liberals, the only independent in a family of Democrats. All right.
Yeah, Bobby is known for his wild, irrational copy pastas. He's also very delusional. So when he took a 23andMe, and he found that under the margin of error for those tests is 7%. So under the margin of error, he found it said he was 1% North African and 2% Ashkenazi. And so now he identifies as Ashkenazi and North African.
Nice.
That's a king. North African
king.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll also talk about. I think you say that humans made capitalism, and well, I agree that is true. I also believe that the same processes that determine things like tornadoes also determine, even though on a much smaller scale and on a much more complex uh, way determine human will and thoughts.
Mhm.
And I'm a determinist in that sense. And I think that what also applies on the small scale of individual humans and humans' minds also applies on the societal scale. So,
Mm.
I would just add a small caveat to that. It's not a mechanical relationship. It's not a one-to-one mapping of those laws to from nature to well, humans are nature, but from the rest of nature to human consciousness.
Mhm. I mean, so what's the upshot of this view of historical development that you guys are putting forth? What's the conclusion that you would like anarchists to observe from that?
the conclusion is that certain systems and certain movements and developments uh, are uh, can't exist in a vacuum and need preceding conditions in order to exist. And society moves forward not based off of what is in a perfect world an ideal system, but based off of the present conditions and the contradictions uh, that exist.
Yeah, so there's a quote from Marx that we talked about in the debate we had on Twitter. Men make history, but they do not make it as they see fit. Um, so we were talking about that quote. I brought it up. And the reason I brought it up is because I think Marxists, after Marx, they got very obsessed with that quote, but they didn't really care about the first proposition in that quote, that men make history. They only cared about the fact that men do not make history as they see fit. So they kind of ignored when Marx said that even if the history of human beings is conditioned by preceding factors, human beings are still the creators of that history. And so Marxists being very obsessed with the fact that this history is the making of history by human beings is based on these preceding factors that set the parameters in which human beings make history. Being obsessed with that idea, they created a kind of historical teleology. So, for instance, if you read, and you probably don't like Trotsky all that much, but he was like the central figure in 19th century Marxism and influenced. I mean, I guess we'll have a debate about, or we could have a debate about how much he influenced Lenin, but I think he influenced Lenin quite a bit. And so he kind of describes how socialism, it's not a matter of necessarily the human subject. It's not a matter of human beings transforming the relationships that make up their society. It's more a matter of the fact that capitalism produces contradictions, and those contradictions need to be solved in some manner. And that inevitably pushes towards socialism, which is the solving of the contradictions in capitalism. Do you have a view
You
that's
agree with that?
similar to that, or what do you think about that?
I would say
Well, Trotsky,
I agree with that because I don't know what Katsky said. I didn't read him, but
Sure.
you will hear the saying with that we repeat very often, socialism or barbarism, basically meaning that we will not necessarily go to socialism. It could also be turning back to barbarism. I think that's Rosa Luxemburg that said that is
Mm-hmm.
that we the contradiction of capitalism push to be resolved need workers to take control of production and then to produce in a planned way, in a democratically decided way. And but that's a struggle that we have to that's a fight that we have to lead consciously to make that happen. And if we fail to make that happen, we could very well be in a situation like the Roman Empire that just collapsed, and then everyone that was in the Roman Empire lost. So both classes could lose the fight in the current situation. So we don't say that you will necessarily go to socialism. Socialism is a way out of the contradictions, but it doesn't mean that we will go there necessarily. So just to clarify.
I mean, I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah, and I would also say that Kautsky is a bit of a moron sometimes.
I agree.
My favorite Kautsky quote is that Pythagoras was one of the early socialists. He was really had a lot of interesting opinions, but
That's really weird because we basically don't know anything about Pythagoras now. I don't know how the fuck he could have had any evidence to suggest that in the
He liked
19th century.
numbers, so maybe he was a
yeah.
kind of like, anyway, I'm not gonna get into those kind of jokes.
I would say that the reason you point out, and it is true, we are very obsessed with the beginning of that. But the reason, and this is another allegory, the one that Leon Trotsky used, our dedication to obsessing or very specifically analyzing the first part of it is similar to how a surgeon would want to very specifically understand biology, the laws of nature, how their tools work, and understand as accurately as possible the constraints of nature in order to most effectively use them to attain their specific goals. And my goal is not to, you know, my personal the personal reason why I'm dedicated to Marxism is not some vague notion of I think that it's our inevitable responsibility as humans to resolve a contradiction. I'm driven to socialism by my own personal compassion and sympathies with the working exploitation of the working class, but in order to achieve liberation, I think it's important to understand the laws of society, which are what enables the revolution.
Mm. So I guess I'll push back in this way. So in terms of the laws of society, there's actually in social science, mainstream social science, not necessarily Marxist social science, but in social science, there's long been a debate over whether you can do something like you can with Newtonian Baconian physics with the study of human relations and societies. So basically, can you describe human societies in terms of laws that are reversible in time, meaning deterministic? And most of the disciplines of the social sciences said, yes, you can. The one dissenting view was from historians who said, no, our history is about a humanistic study. We understand how particular human beings act in particular times and places, not in terms of these laws that operate at a deterministic level. And so that was a debate that went on in social science, and Marxists after Marx took the predominant position in the social sciences that you could describe human societies and history in terms of reversible laws. Now, the issue with that, as I see it, is that Marx's quote about how humans make history is actually not proper. If you properly understand what he's saying, it's actually not a quote about trans history. It's not about a trans historical property or trans historical rule or law. He's actually talking about what you might call prehistory. That is the history of human societies in which alienation is present. Communism or socialism is the transcendence of alienation for Marx. And once you transcend alienation, history becomes something that human beings, in fact, do make according to their own needs. As they desire to make it. The reason that human beings up till now don't make history as they would like is because history is an alienated process. It's a process that human beings don't control because they don't control the relationships that they create between themselves and to nature, between themselves and nature. So that's a view that I don't think either of you share, and we can, I guess, discuss that for the remainder of this conversation.
I think that one of the best quotes on the topic is that to me, communism will be seen as the end of history, but it's not the end of history, but the beginning of history. So I do agree that communism creates communism, not so much creates. Uh, Communism follows from the conditions that are necessary in order to enable a classless, stateless society where people control their own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
That is something I would agree with, and is a way to describe Marx. But I was assuming, since in the I also think that it is incredibly important to understand, and I believe that even though these laws do exist on the large scale, they're much more complex than very simple. Just uh, if these conditions are present, then this thing will happen, because there is also variety within individuals, and chances that any individual mistake can alter the course of history. For example, one that's cited a lot is Spartacus's failure to succeed in the slave revolt. Uh, is, according to a lot of Marxists, one of the major reasons that Rome continued to exist into the much later stages of slave society, and we saw the barbarian invasion and uh, much slower progress of history.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to say something else.
Yeah.
So something more about laws of society. I
Sure.
think I think there are laws to society, and I think we can know them and we can observe them in our history. Like when I'm gonna say productive forces, and then by that what I mean is that the people who work, the knowledge they have to work, the tools they have to do the work they do, and then when those things develop, they reach a stage at which they reach a stage at which the current system can no longer contain them, and something has to be done about that. And very often that results in a revolution. We could see that, like in if we go back to primitive communist societies, when they discovered agriculture, and then they started raising cattle. They started having way more surplus than they used to have, and then that changed the structure of society. We can say the same thing about, like, the passage from feudalism to capitalism, when 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 we started having so much more resources, and then the nascent bourgeoisie needed to have more control over their own lives, because they wanted to keep developing those productive forces, but the feudal lords weren't having it, so they have to do it to make a revolution for that to happen. And the same thing is true for capitalism, though. We have reached a stage, I would say, since the beginning of the 20th century, where we produce way more than we need. We produce way more than the system can handle. And since then, they have had to play a counter-revolutionary role to keep it going. Like the First World War, in essence, was to 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 adapt to that, and all the imperialist wars that have been going on afterwards are essentially playing into that too. So this is one of those laws that we can observe in history. There are laws to human society, just like there are laws to everything that exists. Like it isn't just a random set of things happening. Maybe if you just take the point of view of an individual, it will be all very random. But if you take a general view, you will see that there are broad interests that move society, and then one of those things is the level of development of the productive forces.
Yeah, so I mean, there are some things I could say about that in terms of uh, laws of nature, physics, and so forth. We might not need to get bogged down in that kind of conversation. In terms of productive development of productive forces, um, so something that needs to be there's an unpacking there that needs to be done of the base superstructure idea, the idea that there is the larger institutions of society, the state, culture, etc., and that is in some way determined and produced by the nascent existing forces of production, and then the changes in the forces of production change the superstructure of state and culture and so forth. So in reality, it's not anywhere near that simple. Actually, all of those things, economy, politics, and society, mutually influence each other. And Marx actually understood this when he talked about base and
I
superstructure.
think we agree
Marx
on that
says,
too.
We all
what'd you say?
understand that, I think.
Yeah. So just let me get where I'm going. Um, Marxists after Marx didn't really understand that Marx understood that the relationship there was more complicated. They went on with this simplified base superstructure theory, in which they thought base superstructure was a transhistorical law of human organization. But what Marx actually meant when he was talking about Sharky.
Yeah, I guess it'll be back. I'm not sure why.
Oh,
Okay.
well, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, so what Marx was actually talking about when he talked about base superstructure is that the productive forces become predominant over human agency in societies where production is not something that collective humanity actually controls. So in capitalist society, for example, of course, capitalism is driven by the process of capital accumulation. And so states depend on capital accumulation. Cultures are destroyed or reworked or transformed according to the needs of capital accumulation. And the producers themselves are always acting in accordance with what creates capital accumulation, and that's because the producers don't control the production process. The process of capital accumulation controls the production process. So, in terms of revolutionary transformation, the from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of Marx and the perspective of anarchists, the human liberation is about reversing the base superstructure or undoing the base superstructure relationship, in the sense that production is not something that human beings control. Liberation is about making production something that human beings control for the first time in human history.
Um,
I think
I
there's a couple things that could be said. Go ahead, Chucky.
uh, I would say I was definitely going to say something. I'm forgetting it now. So imagine I made
Yeah,
like a really great point just now.
yeah,
Yeah,
good point. I really agree with that. Thank you
yeah,
for saying this.
yeah.
What I was gonna say is that I think essentially what we mean by base superstructure is that the way we produce the stuff we need to live
Mm-hmm.
determines the rest of society. Like not in a mechanical way, like in a one-to-one mapping, but this is what sets the base for what the rest of society looks like. For example, in primitive communist societies, like for example today, it's really well seen that when you do something good, you come in and then you brag about it, and you say, "Oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I did something really good. Look how good I am at doing this time." But there there are there are records of in some primitive communist society when someone goes out hunting and then they come back with good game, they don't go out and boast about it. They put whatever they came back with in whatever they put it, and then they wait in a corner, and then when they are asked, what did you today, and then they say, oh, I'm such a bad hunter, I didn't get any good game. So that will make no sense today, right? Because
Right.
but that made sense at that time because they needed to keep the communities cohesive. Like if one guy started boasting about everything he did and then started inflating his own head, that was a basis to destroy the community and then ensure that they're on death basically. That's why too, if someone was bragging or just going over and above their own role in a community, they would get kicked out of that community. Meanwhile, today this is not the case. So I think this isn't about like something super historical. I think it's a really simple thing that the way we produce what we need to live will determine what or how laws, conscience, whatever is religions, politics, all these things are done. And even under communism, we will still have to produce things, and maybe we will have a conscious control over production. Like we won't be bowing to the laws of the market or the so-called invisible hand of the market, but we will still have to respect those laws, and then this in turn will determines we can't really tell what it is gonna be like under communism. But I don't think that will disappear. That we will have to we will never be able to make history as we wish because there are laws that we can't change. Like we can't change the fact that gravity pulls everything towards the center of the earth. We can change that. I guess we in a very futuristic future we could, but yeah.
Right. So
I would just say that when you talk about the fact that a lot of Marxists cling to base superstructure and identify it as kind of the only point in society, that's really always been the case among Marxists. There have always been imposters among us who don't really understand what they're talking about and just take words and act like they know what they're saying, like dialectical materialism, but
right.
can't actually apply them and
Are,
don't really
are
understand
you
them.
are you trying to
And
diss Luna here? Do you want me to call Luna? Are you trying to diss her? I
uh,
can call her if you want.
that you better not at okay, you better not at Wuno on me. But yeah.
I'll at Luna Boy.
Oh,
I'll fight
Yes,
she
her.
do
is
that,
a
please.
story.
She
Oh, we'll
can
get into that
she can
later.
tell me that she can tell me that because I'm trans that I'm a CIA backed operative or whatever the fuck.
Wait, she's transphobic too?
So she'll talk. I think she did a video talking about color revolutions, where she basically said like under certain regimes, LGBT activists are like CIA backed psyops.
Yeah, like the Soviet
Yeah,
Union. Yeah,
trying to spread the gay to the critical support to the Central Intelligence Agency,
Yeah.
trying
Right.
to spread the gay internationally.
Right. Yeah.
But just I think what Marxism at its core is putting forward is an incredibly complex and interrelated um, series of which series of properties of societies, economics, philosophy, and politics, which cooperate together to um, historically uh, to determine history
Hmm.
um, and society. It's not as many other Enlightenment thinkers believed. It's not something which people just agree on. There's a lot of other properties at play, and understanding them is much more complex than just taking one and saying this is what always happens when this happens, because there's many different things on many different scales which interact. For example, we could have all the understanding of Marxism we need and say, all right, using all of our understanding of Marxism and human psychology, we will predict that there will be a revolution tomorrow. And then an asteroid hits tomorrow and the Earth is blown into two separate pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Then the prediction isn't. It's not worth anything because there's so many different factors in
Right.
so many different sciences which coalesce to create reality.
Mm-hmm.
So the things like base superstructure and every individual property that we've talked about is just one of these so many different ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the main bone that I'll pick is with the assertion that we can never make our own history. Kind of like I said before, if human beings aren't making their own history, that means that history, the legacy that human beings create, is alien from them, and that can only be the case if human relationships, which human beings create, are not under the control of human beings. I think once the relationships that human beings create come under the control of human beings, then human beings can make their own history. So, or direct their own history. What Hans said about in some way, production always determines the larger society because that is the basis upon which human beings find their sustenance. I'll agree that in all foreseeable societies, human beings sustain themselves on production, whether it's communist society or capitalist society. But the question is whether whether that sustenance producing process is actually under the direction of the producers themselves. And if it's not, then you have a class society, a society of alienation, or what anarchists call a hierarchical society. If it is, then you have communism.
I think we agree that maybe we just have a different definition of on what you mean by making their own history. I do think people can make even now you can make your own history, but you have to know under which laws you're making that history. Like if I want to go to the moon, I will have to understand the laws that will direct this activity and adapt to them to make devices that will be able to overcome them. Just like today, we want to have a socialist revolution, but the bourgeoisie doesn't want that. So we have to adapt to their laws and then learn how to use those to make that revolution happen. And I think the same thing will still be true under communism. Maybe we won't be bound by capitalists because they won't be capitalists, but we will still be bound by the laws of nature, and then we will still have to learn how to use those laws. We won't be doing whatever we want whenever we want. Maybe we will be reaching the goals we set for ourselves, but we will have to adapt the means we use to reach those goals. We will never be able to just make anything happen whenever we want, no matter the society.
So I think in terms of communism, in a communist society, there is no what Marx might call metabolic rift between human beings and nature. The way human beings, from my perspective, are, and from Marx's perspective, are the conscious aspects of nature. They are the parts of nature capable of understanding itself. And so, if human beings are alienated from nature, like I think we are with the current climate crisis, then that means our relationship to nature that we create is not something that we control. When we bring our relationship to nature under our own control, that means we can have a meaningful interaction with nature, a meaningful relationship with nature, in which we aren't separated by artificial processes from the natural world. We can navigate the natural world and transform the natural world in terms of our needs and the needs of nature being in harmony. So So in communism, yes, I imagine gravity will still pull things to the center of the Earth, but the way that we interact with the forces that produce things like gravity is going to be different in the sense that we won't be something set apart from those forces. We will be in a kind of horizontal, egalitarian engagement with those forces.
I don't think that will ever happen. I'm not sure what you mean by egalitarian. We will never have an egalitarian relationship with gravity. We will always have to adapt to it, or maybe adapt to the laws.
Well, I'm not saying that
gravity.
I'm not saying that in communism human beings will not be pulled to the center of the earth by gravity. What I'm saying is that nature.
It will have to be voluntary.
What I'm saying is that nature, as nature, will not be something separate from the human being. It will be something that we have an organic relationship with.
I really do have to head out now.
I think that should be the goal. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, so if you have to go, we can end it there on a point of agreement. Thanks for coming on and having the discussion with me.
Yeah. What's your Twitter, Piper?
I'll send it to you in
Sure.
the Discord chat.
That works. But yeah, it was nice. We can discuss that more if you want on Twitter or Discord, whatever. And
Sure.
yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you everyone for watching. See you guys later.
All right.